Okay, so we are now live for the Migrant Woman Reality Watch number 25. Really happy to come back after a little bit of pause, and we're very happy to have today Ruchira Gupta with us. Welcome, Ruchira.
Namaste.
So yeah, today's interview was very special because I've been a longtime fan of Ruchira. Because she has connections to this organization that is a member organization of DNO, which is ISALA. And we're very happy to be able to talk to you today and to listen from you and for our audience to learn a bit from you. So first of all, I just wanted to present Ruchira a little bit. If you've seen the other Migrant Woman Reality Watches, you know that this is being live streamed on our Facebook page. There is therefore a little space for the comments for the audience to ask a question for Ruchira. I will do my best to address it if we don't run it out of time. And these interviews are later on uploaded to our Migrant Woman YouTube channel. So anytime that you may want to share those, they are ready to go on our page. So yes, today I have Ruchira Gupta with me. She is the founder president of Apne Aap Women Worldwide, but also Apne Aap International. And she is currently working on the 1 million meals campaign in the framework of COVID. We will address this later, so don't worry. But I am already leaving the link here for the audience to click on if they want to check it out while the interview is going on. So Ruchira is also a social justice activist, a feminist campaigner, a journalist. And right now she is also a professor at New York University and also a distinguished scholar at the University of California in Berkeley. So it's been over 3 decades that Ruchira has been campaigning and working for a world where no women and girls are bought and sold. And she has pioneered many gender-sensitive interventions to tackle the problem of intergenerational prostitution, which is something that interests us a lot. So I'm hoping that we will be able to tackle all of this during the interview, but I know that there's many talks of Ruchira online, namely one of the last ones that she did with CAP International. So I invite everyone to check out the CAP International page and see if you can find Ruchira in there. So yes, I'm going to give the floor now to Ruchira. I was hoping that you could present yourself. I know that I have already done a little bit this for you, but I believe that women should have the space to talk about themselves in the first person. So yes, who is Ruchira Gupta and how did you bring Apne Aap to life?
I am a human being and I exist on this planet like all of us, and I believe we are interconnected and interdependent. I was born in Calcutta, a town, a big city in India, and I went to an all-girls school and an all-girls college. And I learned about feminism much later, though I experienced discrimination in different ways growing up. So I did experience discrimination in the fact that, in college I was told that don't wear clothes which don't have sleeves because men will exploit you. Or, if you don't study well and get the highest of marks, you will be married off and have to look after a man and his family. And so I was always given this kind of messaging that my life would be limited if I did not do this, and that limited life was what was destined for women. And I, of course, did not believe any of that. So I kept carving out my own space. And I was born in a very Gandhian, a family which believed in Gandhi and social justice itself. So luckily for me, the inputs I was getting in society, which was very patriarchal, was different from the inputs I was getting at home, where I was told that any human can be whatever they want and they have a duty to fulfill their full potential. So our home used to be full of writers, journalists, poets, singers, and they would talk about changing the world. So I learned that at home and I wanted to do my bit. So I decided I would do it through writing and be a journalist. And it was as a journalist that I faced what was very obvious patriarchy, where what was related to men was considered political, and what was related to girls was considered cultural. And the editor would often tell me that, oh, you should cover political stories. That's how you'll get front page. And I would say, what do you define as political stories? And he would always want to have like what the male government authorities were talking to each other, the elected ministers, etc. But if women were raped, or women were disenfranchised from the vote, or if women were kidnapped or did not, or their homes were raided in caste riots, their voices were never written about. It was not considered important enough. And I found that very frustrating. And of course, the atmosphere in the office was also very sexist, where all the women reporters had to suck up to the editor, who was male. And, there were things which were now would be considered completely sexual harassment, which happened right in front of my eyes. And later, I quit that job because I just thought it was all very hypocritical and it wasn't fulfilling my needs to be the journalist I wanted to. And I went off to Delhi and I began to report on issues which I felt were interconnected to patriarchy, but which were political, because I wanted to prove to the world there was a different way of political reporting. And I chose to cover minority rights and religious freedoms because I thought religion was a big reason why women were being subjugated. And in the course of doing that, I ended up following the campaign of a very sort of masculine party, which was founded by a group which was anyway all male. It was an all male paramilitary organization called the RSS, which was founded in correspondence with Mussolini and Hitler. And this group had started a political party, and the political party had launched a big Islamophobic campaign in India to go destroy a mosque and reclaim Hindu pride. So I followed this party to the destruction of the mosque as a journalist. And I watched as they made hate speeches from the roof to demolish this mosque. And after the first dome of the mosque came down, I went inside the mosque because as a journalist, I'd been trained to go to the spot and report what was exactly happening. So I went inside the mosque wearing jeans and a loose shirt. And of course, I did not look like any of those Hindutva bigots who were destroying the mosque. So they immediately started attacking me. Some people tried to strangle me, and some people were also sexually molesting me, like poking me, pinching my breasts, etc. And saying, "Kill her, kill her. She is definitely must be a Muslim. Who is she? Why is she here?" And I was so close to death that I could not understand how to get the words out to say, "I'm not Muslim. I'm born Hindu. And I'm a reporter. I'm not like here, part of you all," and all of that. I could not get the words out. But somehow, what happened was that somebody said, "Let's not kill her here inside the mosque. Let's drag her to a trench outside." And I think it must have been with the intention to rape me, because I was dragged out to this trench dug around the mosque. And these men were still there. And suddenly there was a man I'd interviewed the day before who said, "Oh, I know her. She's interviewed me. She's from my village. She's a reporter. Don't touch her. Don't touch her." And he jumped in to save me. And I was saved from dying and from being raped. This man dragged me out and he said, "Where do you want to go?" And I said, "I want to go back to the rooftop from where these leaders are making hate speeches, because once they see me, they will understand the consequences of the hate speech. These people are on a rampage, and not only are they destroying the mosque, but they're attacking women, they're attacking journalists." So the man took me back to the roof, and there I spoke up to this leader. And he didn't answer. He just turned around and said, "Oh, but forget what happened to you. This is such a historic day for our country and for our religion. Have something sweet to eat." So I said, "I don't want your sweets. I just want to get home safely. Can you tell me how to get home safely?" And he was watching houses burn through his binoculars, and he gave me those binoculars. And I said, "Whose houses are these? Why are people burning these homes?" They were basically shanties of poor people who had built their shanties around the mosque. And he said, "Oh, these are poor Muslims who are burning their own homes to get compensation from the government." And of course, it was not true. So I was really aghast, and I decided to not take his sugar. He went away from the terrace to some room downstairs. And I found some other journalists who were also worried and who were being attacked. And together we formed a group and got into a car and drove back to Delhi. But when I spoke up about what happened in Delhi at the press club, I faced a backlash. And that backlash was terrible because people said, oh, girls from good families should not speak up. Where are your scratch marks? You're doing it for publicity. Are you sure it really happened to you? Isn't it? Are you imagining it? It couldn't have been so bad. Or, why talk about it? Forget it and move on. So things like that. And I really felt gaslighted. And at that time, I did not have the vocabulary, but I knew that I had to keep speaking the truth. And I even went and testified in court about what I had seen, because a commission of inquiry was set up into this destruction of the mosque and the subsequent killing of hundreds of Muslims in celebration by this party. And what I saw, then was that, in the court, they asked me questions like, are you an actress? Do you smoke cigarettes? Do you act in TV serials? Do you have many male boyfriends? Do you believe in any god? How could a girl of a good family go in front of such a big leader and speak to him? So I learned how to respond because I had to speak the truth. I've always been a great believer in the truth. So I responded by saying that the shame was not mine, it was his. And I come from a family which believes in truth and Gandhi. And so I'm speaking up because of that. And, it doesn't matter if I have male friends or, I'm explaining what happened, and you need to hold those people accountable. Of course, those people were not held accountable. And today that party is the ruling party of India. And, the person who was there in the destruction of the mosque, one of those people is the Prime Minister of India. The others are, in different posts and all of that. So it's a bad time. So that's how I literally learned. A girl who had not faced any violence, or I had come from a very privileged background because my family had privilege. They were well off, though they believe they were always fighting for freedom and social justice believers. But I didn't have to starve. I went to a good school. I was allowed to do what I wanted, fulfill, explore my potential. But I really faced this. In the mosque and then later in the courts when I was testifying. And that made me who I am, because that made me understand what countless women go through, how they are attacked, and how when they speak up, either their testimony is made invisible, or it is trivialized, or it is marginalized. So I understood what silencing means and what gaslighting means very, very clearly in those 2 years. This was about 2 decades ago. And then at that time, I was so disgusted with everybody in Delhi for trying to silence me that I resigned from my job and I was pushed off to the hills of Nepal. And there, when I was walking through villages in Nepal, I came across rows of villages with missing girls. And as a good journalist, I followed the trail and ended up making a documentary called The Selling of Innocence, for which I won an Emmy for outstanding investigative journalism. And I think I made the documentary more passionately because of what had happened to me. And I wanted to convey exactly what the most invisible women go through. And these were the women in prostitution whose testimony is always invisibilized, trivialized, or marginalized. Until this day, I feel that they are being gaslit. It's very interesting. I run this NGO which is called Apne Aap Self Action in Hindi, and we represent more than 20,000 women in prostitution. And every time any of our members speak to journalists, they say that, please do not call us sex workers, call us prostituted women or prostituted children or victims of sex trafficking. But every time that journalists will go back and use the term commercial sex worker, they keep gaslighting the women. They will not listen to their testimony. And, so I noticed that this trend continues, and I hope to stand by these women to make sure their gaslighting is not done by us. And so that was one thing. At the end of the documentary, I went back with my award to the women in prostitution. And they asked me that how could I help them? And we sat in a circle in the brothels of Mumbai and decided that the way to do it was to start an NGO. And we called the NGO Apne Aap, which means self-action. And the business plan of the NGO was really four dreams that the women had. They said the four dreams were school for their children, a job in an office, a room of their own, and justice. Now, what did these four things mean? They wanted schooling for their children because they wanted to save their daughters from prostitution, their sons from pimping. A room of their own because, in a brothel, a customer walks in night or day anytime. So many of the women suffer from insomnia. They have no privacy. In the brothels of India, the children are playing on the floor while the customer is on the bed next door. And the third thing they wanted, a job in an office, really was what they meant by that was dignity, fixed monthly income, old age pension, no physical and mental health consequence of doing that job, because as you know, in prostitution, body invasion or body penetration is absolutely the most thing which customers buy, and that cannot be legislated away. And that has repeated body invasion, obviously has physical and mental health consequences. And the final thing they said, they wanted justice. They said those who had bought them and sold them, who had brokered away their disease, their dreams, should be punished. So this became our business plan. We rented a room, hired a teacher, began to educate the children. When it came time to put the children into school, we took them to school. And the principal said no. The women formed a circle, the first Apne Aap Women Circle, called a mandala, Mahila Mandal, and they begged, cried, cajoled, and the principal relented. Today the children have finished college, they have jobs, dominoes, parlor managers, animation artists, lawyer, graphic designer, different things. And the women's dreams now continue from the first 22 women. Now we have helped more than 20,000 women. We've educated more than 1,000 children through school and college, and still continue to do that. And that has been Apne Aap's journey. Our vision, of course, is to create a world in which no human being is bought or sold. And we start with the person I call the last girl. And to me, that girl is that girl in the brothel whose choices were taken away from her because she's poor, female, from an oppressed caste, and a teenager. And because of all the intersecting inequalities, her access to food, clothing, shelter is gone. So I keep trying to reach that last girl in any way I can to prevent her from being sold into prostitution and, to continue her journey into a better life.
Thank you for those inspiring words. And I think it's very interesting for you to explain this because here in Europe or in the global South, we have a specific way of implementing such community work. And I think it's very, very good to see different modes of functioning and different modes of grassroots action. That's what we need to take example on. So thank you so much for that. I wanted to ask you something about the prostitution system in India. Because here in the global north, we're not very used to it. We're used to seeing, those documentaries with the kind of scenes that you described, little rooms. But I feel like we don't have enough knowledge on it. So I wanted to ask you, first of all, how is maybe prostitution perceived in Indian society? And how is the grassroots work that you do perceived by the general population? If you face any backlash, or is it viewed as odd, the kind of work that you do? I will start by that because I have many questions, so I think I will start light.
So prostitution is definitely viewed as it's considered an exploitative occupation. People know that those who are in prostitution are from the most vulnerable sections of society. That's for sure. Now, in terms of stigma, who is stigmatized? So in Indian society, it's not the sex buyer who's stigmatized. It's the prostituted woman and the prostituted child who is stigmatized. They are told they are bad women and they must be doing it for easy money and things like that. It's a very sexist and misogynistic culture, and also class and caste are tied into this. So there's sort of a way of a lens of looking at these most vulnerable women, which is top down. So it's, that these are bad women who are doing it for easy money and will not want to do a day's work, honest work. And then the other thing which happens in prostitution is that in Indian society, people think that girls from good families should be available. So, upper class and upper caste women are not raped, which means that people think that the buying of sex, the purchase of women's bodies is okay, and some women have to be available for their bodies to be purchased to save other women who may have more privilege. Now, this is very sexist, and it is also very elitist, because it means that upper class women should be saved by working class women, and also that men will be men, and it's women among themselves who have to save each other, whereas men will continue to buy them and exploit them. So it's a very strange way of looking at things. And nobody talks about the male sexual urge to buy a woman's body, to dominate a woman's body. And this has been very bad for India as a whole, because, as you know, India has had spiraling rape, and more women from Dalit groups and from migrant groups and daily wage earners have been raped increasingly, and including paramedic students now and journalists, and it's just increasing, right? So India is almost sometimes called the rape capital of the world, and it has been like people who are 45 years old to 3-month-old babies who are being raped. And one of the reasons is that the purchase, domination, and sexual exploitation of women's bodies has been normalized, where we hear comments like, oh, prostitution is as old as the hills, or if prostitutes don't exist, women from good families will be raped. This is what normalizes prostitution and the purchase of sex, and excuses men who are buying women's bodies or children's bodies. Along with this, of course, is the whole issue of child marriage, where the body invasion of a child is not considered wrong, because children are married off so early and their body is penetrated, and many of them die early while giving birth to children themselves. So we have to overcome these odds as we go forward in our work against prostitution. And it has been really hard. There are other systems which have also normalized prostitution in Indian society. One is called the Devadasi system, where girls were married to goddesses. And then once they were married to the god or the goddess, they were sold later into prostitution they were sent off to the brothels, or the priest would sell them to the brothels, and they were considered devalued and not had no value for marriage. So this has also become a pipeline for prostitution in India. And there's a lot of romanticizing and glorification even in modern Indian culture of prostitution, that people will say, oh, it's a choice, and what is the difference between a bad marriage and prostitution or daily wage work? Well, the difference is this has absolutely tied into it physical and mental health consequences, because that body is being penetrated multiple times by multiple people, and it not starting from skin diseases to insomnia, to sexually transmitted diseases, to repeated abortions and rape. All of it, of course, it's different from a bad marriage and daily wage work, because this is because this has outright health consequences which are harmful. And most of the women in prostitution suffer from very high rates of PTSD because of everything they go through. So, in India, yeah, it's very sad that prostitution is normalized. And now there's also a movement inside India saying that pimping and brothel keeping should be legalized. And the short form of the way they explain this is by saying, oh, prostitution should be legalized. But then when you ask, what do you mean by that? Because nobody is stopping an adult woman from selling her body for sex. So do you want child prostitution to be legalized? Do you want pimping and brothel keeping to be legalized? So they'll say, yes, why not? But that means that the exploiter will be legalized.
This really reminds me of one time that I went to the European Parliament, and they had a pro-prostitution photographic exhibition, and you could see children in brothels, so most probably children who are prostituted as well, in Thailand, if I'm not mistaken, and in India, and they clearly had the message like child sex worker, So of course, any kind of dynamics such as the ones you're talking about would inevitably lead to the sexual exploitation of children even more. I was going to ask you, how does this sex work or sex positive movements play a role in this, but you kind of are already expanded in this. But I followed this Indian filmmaker called Vaishnavi Sundar, and she's been talking a lot about the normalization of buying and selling women and children in India. So something definitely to keep an eye on, and it's a very worrying trend, and it's a very colonialist trend as well.
That's right. Actually, the thing is that it's so interesting that how this idea, this movement of for legalizing pimping and brothel keeping grew in India by just pretending to be on behalf of women and saying that we want women to become sex workers. So if women become sex workers, who gains? It's not the women who gain, because their body is still going to be penetrated come what may. And if their body is going to be invaded come what may, they are going to face the physical and mental health consequences come what may. And in prostitution, you earn the most on your first day in the job, because as your body gets invaded more and more every day, it loses its ability to do anything, and there are diseases which accompany it. So you earn less and less. And then the customer says in India he wants fresh meat. So, by the time you're 35 or so, nobody wants to buy you. And it's not that you earn more with more experience in prostitution, you earn less. So, it's not a sustainable occupation. And COVID has also shown it's not a sustainable occupation, because there's infection, and if people come in bodily contact with each other, they're going to get infected. So this is a very, very dangerous occupation for women. And we have to think about things like this, especially post the world of COVID, where we all have come in contact with the idea of infection and how we can easily get infected. So just because we have more privilege, we should not give up on thinking about other people who have less privilege and where they should be. So I think the sex work movement, we have to really think about how this movement started in India. And, who are the sex workers? Are they the pimps, the brothel keepers, or the women really, because the women are still as exploited. In India, it happened twice. So the first time that brothels were legalized in India, it was under British colonialism. When the British actually wanted to save their soldiers and clerks from a disease called syphilis, which had broken out in the British Empire. And they thought, they will not be able to rule the empire if all their soldiers die or their officers die. So they created licensed brothels all over the Commonwealth. And licenses were given on the condition that the brothel manager would take all the women in prostitution for health checkups to a municipal authority. If the women were disease-free, license renewed. And the license was hung at the door of the brothel with a red light over it. And so whenever any customer wanted to come, like a soldier or an officer, he would go to the red light district. He would see a red light shining over Welcome House 65, Welcome House 67, and know that this brothel is disease-free. So basically, the entire program was to protect the soldiers and clerks, not the women who could die, live, whatever happened to them. And funnily enough, the British left, and many years later, the AIDS pandemic hit the world, just like the syphilis had broken out in the British Empire. And what response did the 45-year-old policymakers and the 45-year-old men like Bill Gates, who own foundations and who had a lot of money at their disposal, decide to do? they decided to go back to old British ideas, which were completely misogynistic and elitist, and impose the same notion. They said that let us legalize the prostitution system and give licenses to brothels and allow women to operate as long as they make the customer use a condom. And basically, the entire policy was to protect the male buyer from disease rather than protecting the women and girls from male buyers. They just threw women and girls under the bus. They did not want to protect them from trafficking, from not finding other livelihoods, nothing. And that is where in India the sex work movement began, because the funding came from the big foundations and everyone needs a job. And people began to justify, then getting their consultancies and getting their jobs, that of course condoms will protect you from AIDS and this benefits the women. It may benefit the women somewhat, but it doesn't benefit them totally. And their livelihoods come to a halt, and then what are they to do? Whereas it does benefit the customers much more. And today the irony of it is that the very people who started this movement, it's a group, there are two groups in India who talk about this a lot. One is in Calcutta, and that group is called DMSC, and it was funded by the Gates Foundation and Ford Foundation and others. And the other group is called VAMP, and it is based in Maharashtra in Sangli. And the group called DMSC was led by a doctor called Dr. Jana. And the funny thing is that he has died of COVID. He was infected by coming in contact with somebody, so he just died this year. And he had made someone become the head of the DMSC, who was the son of a prostituted woman, and that man committed suicide. Because when he had to run the organization, he realized all the contradictions and hypocrisies in that. And so, the movement was more appropriated by people who wanted to promote something rather than what was actually happening on the ground. And the same thing is happening with VAMP in Maharashtra, is that, these sugar workers who are losing jobs in factories and sliding from factory work to contract work to daily wage work into prostitution because there are no labor safeguards for them or no social safety nets for them. And again, the discourse has shifted from fighting for better labor rights inside factories and plantations to fighting for prostitution to exist and the pimps and the brothel keepers to be legalized. So again, we are harming ourselves and harming society in general too, because everyone's rights are taken away when you allow the rights of someone else to be eroded. Because today all labor rights, and nobody's discussing that. We are discussing the rights of pimps and brothel keepers. It is such an irony, and this is what the sex work movement is doing.
Okay. A lot of food for thought and research. Is it, I wanted to ask you just to finish on this question. You expanded a little bit because the phenomenon of prostitution in India is clearly caste-based and class-based. But I also saw on your pages and with a little bit of research that there's a big migrant community in India. So most probably than not, though that migrant community is also sexually exploited in the red light areas and the slums, right?
Yes. So, one of the things which has happened this year has been the COVID, right? And COVID hit India in a big way in March of 2020, about a year and some months ago. And when COVID hit, our Prime Minister, who has authoritarian tendencies, decided to tackle COVID not as a public health measure, but as a law and order measure. So what he did was that he basically announced a lockdown, which was like a police curfew. So trains, trucks, buses, flights, even cycling on the road, walking on the road was all banned. And suddenly there were daily wage earners across the country, including some of the women that I work with who were in prostitution, and we had transitioned them into daily wage work, like selling vegetables or making tea, suddenly lost their livelihoods overnight. Many of them were also thrown out of the homes they lived in because they were living in rented accommodation and they could not pay the rent. Children that I was sponsoring in boarding schools who were children of prostituted women were sent back home because the schools were closed, back into the red light area. And so migrant women, women in slums, women in red light areas were trapped inside rooms, sometimes with no windows, 11 people to a room, no running water, and no income in nowhere. And many of them had began to walk hundreds and thousands of kilometers back to their villages, thinking that in the village they might at least find a shelter and some food or something and have their clan and the community with them. Uh, Many of them were preyed upon by traffickers on the way, like truck drivers who were carrying food, etc. They would say, "Oh, we'll give you a little milk and little food, and just have sex with us." And I made a comic on that called Priya and the Wolves, about the migrant crisis in India and how traffickers were preying upon them. And I also wrote about it extensively. I launched a relief effort, a massive relief effort at that time, because women told me they were contemplating suicide. Some had sold their last gold chain. One mother even abandoned her children in the red light area and ran away because she couldn't cope. And so I knew that I had to at least ensure that the women and children stayed alive. So I began a food drive, which I called 1 million meals, which was supposed to be for 100 days for 10,000 women, because I thought eventually the government will step in and do something else to help the women and children. But what happened was that now, many hundreds of days later, a year and some months later, the government has not set up any supply chains to get food and essential medicines to the most vulnerable of communities. So even in the COVID relief effort, the most vulnerable are still the most excluded. And my food drive has had to continue. So I have now helped more than 250,000 women and children from the most excluded and marginalized communities of India get more than 6 million meals in the form of dry rations like rice, potatoes, onions, vegetables, spices, etc., across the country. And I've created supply chains which start from the factory owner to reach the 13-year-old in the brothel through virtual WhatsApp groups. And I've created a human chain through that. So I will have someone who will be a factory owner who will donate some sugar. Then I will find a truck driver who will pick up the sugar. The truck driver will then be part of another human chain who will take it to a warehouse owner where the food will be deposited. Then some students will come. They will divide the food into different ration kits, student volunteers. Then the student volunteers will make sure there's another set of transporters who take it to the community mobilizers. The community mobilizers receive the food and distribute it to my last girls. And this is how my human chain is running. Sometimes there are also shopkeepers and dealers who join the chain. Sometimes there are also partner organizations like your migrant women's group who will say, we will amplify your voice. So that becomes part of the human chain. In New York right now, I have a company called Francine Vincenti, which is selling their tote bags to raise funds for us to buy more food. So, different people become part of this human chain. And I have been running this because the government has failed. And, I know a lot of people in Europe are going to be listening to your show right now. So I appeal to them to join our human chain and help us keep getting the food to the last girl. Our website is apneaap.org, or the website for this campaign is called 1millionmeals.org. And all of you are willing to join in, but, it's terrible what an authoritarian government can do to poor people. And this is a lesson to learn for Europe, but Europe knows it already, I guess.
Yes. I have left here already in the chat the links so that our audience can participate if they wish so. We really encourage you to do so, for at least we have the knowledge of it on firsthand, so it's great. On the subject of what we were talking before, these foundations that legitimize the buying and selling of women and girls, We have a question from the audience. If you could expand or tell us a little bit about the CREA organization, CREA.
So CREA is a kind of an academic organization of some people who deal with sex and sexuality, I think. And they have a training institute which organizes, I think, a summer school or something like that. And they give fellowships to people to come and learn about things there. And, they have, of course, been advocating for rights, for sexual rights, and especially they have been very active in fighting for the rights of those who are treated badly for their sexuality. So, gay rights, transgender rights, LGBTQI rights. At the same time, so of course, because such groups have been traditionally been treated badly both at home and in society and in the workplace, and also very often by law enforcement to beat them up, etc. So it's very, very critical work. But on the other hand, what they have done is they have also mixed up the work of fighting for sexuality rights with the work for fighting for the rights of pimps and brothels to legalize prostitution. Because in prostitution, a woman loses control of her body. Whereas what CREA is fighting for in the context of LGBTQI is to gain control of your sexuality. But in prostitution, women and children lose control of their sexuality. But somehow they have mixed this up. And it is a pity because they need to understand that there's a difference between the two.
Thank you for that. As the interview is coming to an end, I would really like to hear your thoughts on, or if you had a message to address to those organizations, individual civil society organizations, governments even, that frame the abolitionist model and the way it functions as a product of a Western or colonialist privilege. That is what we hear here in Europe. Whenever we advocate for the equality model or the Nordic model, we are confronted with this idea that we are trying to impose a Western way of viewing things, or a colonialist or neo-imperialist kind of acting. So I was wondering if you had, as last words, a counteracting message to that idea.
So, West is just a direction. We have to remember that. And so today I'm in New York, and for me, the West is Japan. So, which if I was in India, that would be the East. So it's all very relative. What we have to think about is go beyond these binaries of East or West, and think about what do we want. And if we want a world in which no girl or woman is bought or sold, then that's neither a Western concept or an Eastern concept. We have to take on whatever structures of power that are there, which take away that right to not be bought or sold, right? So if in India I have feudalism, and that is, manifest through temple prostitution or the zamindari system which set up concubines, etc. Let us not glorify it. Then let us look at it in the face and make sure we tackle it. In America, if we have capitalism which makes sure that the market is so normal that anything which is paid for is okay, even exploitation, then we challenge that in America. In Europe, there may be cultural traditions like a boy's rite of passage is to go to a prostituted woman to learn how to have sex. Then let us challenge that culture. So the idea of freedom belongs to all of us. And let us not say it's Eastern or Western. Let's fight for that freedom.
Thank you so much, Ruchira. Thank you for being with us today. Just reminding the audience to please consider donating, or at least sharing the 1 Million Meals campaign, so that we can advance the rights of women and girls who are prostituted in India. And just as a reminder as well, this is being live streamed, so it is easily shareable. If you don't have the chance to join in today, we will be posting this from our YouTube channel. And yes, that's it. I wish you a very, very good day, Ruchira. I know it's quite early in New York, so I hope you have a great day, and thank you again for all the insights that you brought here today.
Thank you, Adriana. I'm so grateful to you for creating this platform, and hopefully we will have many more conversations.
Yes. Thank you. Take care and sisterhood to you.
Sisterhood from me too. Bye.
Bye.